Hi, welcome back to Eternally Amy. And we are in a journaling series right now, talking about the purge system and moving from fear to freedom. I always want to say from freedom to fear, which I guess is kind of true in a sense, because I seem to do that automatically, like sort of overnight. And then in the morning, I find, okay, I got to move from fear to freedom. So, anyways, that's what we've been working on. So, we started with the P. We talked about powerlessness, how so many things in our lives we are powerless over, except for our attitude, right? Our actions, our choices in how we handle these life situations that come at us. And you know what? P.S. Life is relentless, right? It just keeps coming at us. Why? Just kidding. But then we talked about, how admitting that powerlessness actually is power. That is the power that we have, the power of choice in how we handle these things. And then we talked about you understanding obligations and opportunities, and that we can create opportunities from obligations by looking at them as get tos. I get to do this, not I have to do this. And then the way that we prioritize, like, hey, what are the very brass tacks of what I need to get done today, right? What are the things I must do that have natural consequences if I don't do them? And then also, what I kind of didn't really talk about last time, but also wanted to mention is, when we're making those lists and learning to prioritize, it's like the next level down from the brass tacks would be, hey, what could I get done today? That would mean I'm absolutely killing it. I'm just crushing it, right? And P.S., I'm sorry, it is almost time for school to commence, but it hasn't yet. And so part of this podcast is getting into acceptance that my house is never quiet, whether it's children, whether it is random people opening my door, asking where the mustard is, or if we have any more mouthwash. You name it, I will be interrupted, and there will be audio quality issues. And so I apologize for that. If that bothers you, I'm really sorry. You're welcome to read the transcript, or perhaps, in the words of Seth Godin, this is not for you. And that's okay. It's totally fine. And I have mad respect for you. But this is just part of me. It is part of living in an extremely busy household with eight kids coming and going, and a husband, and like just life things happening, whether it's rain that you can hear outside in Seattle or a summertime leaf blower concert that was previously arranged, but somehow I missed the memo on it, whatever it is, or bikers. We have a lot of bikers in this area and they will roll by. So these are signs of life. That's how I look at it. And they don't bother me, but they may bother you. So you, do what you need to do. Anyway, so that's what we talked about before. That's kind of the recap. And we talked about different ways of doing this through journaling and different ways that you can write. We've talked about the connection between the mind and the body. And today we're going to look at the R in purge, which is reframing and resetting. So, one thing that I found that is just always a detriment to my life is stinking thinking, right? So the brain, as far as I understand it, tends to stick like Velcro to the negative, right? And the positive stuff that we get into our lives positive feedback from somebody, for example, it just rolls right off like Teflon. And while I like to think that maybe that is a way of sort of keeping us humble, it's also a fight to really maintain a spirit of like, okay, let me just remember that things are neither good or bad. I don't know what's good for me in the grand scheme of things, which is why it is so important for me to get to that foundational yes in the morning time, especially. And then at multiple other points throughout the day. Like my sponsor always says, you get to start your day all over again at any point. And maybe that's at 11:30 at night. You really you get that choice, right? That is an opportunity because we have breath in our lungs, we have blood pumping through our veins, and it's a right? So anyway, the back to the brain, and I understand this only from podcasting and from talking to um, experts in the field and my own personal psychiatrists and psychologists, right? So the brain is always looking for a solution, is what I'm told. So the second it is presented with a problem, um, my brain will start buzzing around looking for a solution. And for me, and for many addicts and alcoholics and people who struggle with mental health issues, it is kind of a fight to just keep that delusional thinking out. So I'm not speaking about like hearing voices or seeing things. In at least in my personal experience, what I'm talking about is my brain deciding it's going to create a drama out of something that is not a drama. And part of that, too, I know, is also the creative nature of who I am. So, as a writer, and I've done this for as long as I can remember, I created imaginary, fictitious scenes in my head from the time I was very young until today. But today it's more dangerous for me because, which is why I primarily, well, one of the reasons that I primarily write nonfiction is because it's an opportunity to get honest with myself and to put myself in other people's shoes based off of the experiences that I have gone through. But when I create in my head things that are happening, people, places, and things, and then I put spins on it. Oh, well, I bet that person didn't say hi to me because they don't like me or because of this, that, and the other thing. I'll create stuff, I'll read into it, then I'm mad. Then I'm in the shower practicing like a lecture that I'm going to give that person when I see them. None of these things are true. And I'm not like all consumed by these things, but they happen. They happen because the brain likes to solve problems, make problems to solve, and the brain doesn't really like just like emptying itself, right? That's why meditation is so difficult, especially for people with ADHD. And that is why it is so imperative that I practice it, right? So I think for me, it is really vital. In fact, I would go as far as to say it's crucial that I like call out negative thoughts when they present themselves to my brain, because chances are really slim that somebody out there has a voodoo doll of me and is voodooing and pricking me with needles trying to make my life miserable, right? This is in the eye of the beholder. This is perspective, right? Marianne Williamson, who wrote Return to Love, based off of A Course in Miracles, she is always talking about a perspective shift, right? That is my goal as a student of mental and emotional health and as an advocate for recovery and mental and emotional health, right? is that that perspective shift is hard to get to. But once we start using tools to help us get there, it's exercising a new set of muscles. And once we can do that, we really can move through I'm breaking these down really organically, right? Like I'm getting down to like the absolute crumbs of this process. It goes much faster for me now, generally speaking, unless I'm just really torn up about something. But this is how we get that miracle going and we make that switch. We make that switch to be able to just go, hold on a second. Am I imagining this? Is this real? Did this really happen? Or am I just making this up in my head, right? Because the problem is once we start relying on entertaining those fake thoughts, we start to go a little crazy and we're kind of like mentally telling ourselves untruths that we're then believing. But it stands to reason if we are presenting fictitious things to our brain to believe, we can also train our brain to stop in its tracks, right? And reset and just go, you know what? I don't think that's actually true. I really don't think it's actually true. And again, fear being false evidence appearing real, right? So, oh, I fear that I won't be liked if I show up at that school event and I run into that person or whatever it is. It's like that's false evidence appearing real. Did that person ever tell you, "Hey, I don't like you," right? Did that person ever say that? Probably not. Maybe. But in my case, that hasn't happened. So I don't know anything about anything. And that's why, as a 12-step community, we really rely on a lot of different inputs from different places, right? One of those prayers being the set aside prayer. Let me, set aside everything that I think I know. Let me just go ahead and set that aside so that I can have an open mind and a new experience. Because that's what I'm cultivating in the morning with journaling or at any point in the day with journaling, right? It's trying to get back to that fundamental yes, that place of spirituality, that place of peace, right? Okay, so um it is something that I want to say Rumi said, and again, I'm paraphrasing this, that the universe is rigged in my favor, right? I believe that wholeheartedly, or the concept of that, right? And so, what would happen if I'm trying to convince myself that, oh, I had a conversation with this person and they were judging me or they were giving me what my kids would call the bombastic side eye or something like that? Well, you know, I would need to look for evidence that that is true. And that is what always stops me in my tracks. So, how could I then, just the second I start to think about something like that, oh, that person was judging this, that, or the other thing, or, oh, I read that email and it was saying this, when the reality is, no, it wasn't saying that. When I go back like the next day and I reread it, 9 times out of 10, I find I sort of read into the email. I did not read the email for its actual content. This kind of stuff has happened to me countless times. And thank God I have learned to pause when agitated or doubtful or not understanding or feeling just in a place of not spiritual uh, acceptance or peace, right? And they talk about it in ADHD circles, the emotional stoplight, right? If I'm at a red or even a yellow, I need to really be careful what I'm taking in and how I'm processing that information, whether it's someone speaking to me, whether it's something I'm reading directed to me, whether it's a book review, whatever it is, you know, I need to be at a place where I can receive it. And that's when I am emotionally at a green light. And then I can really receive it with love. I can receive it with an understanding heart, right? So all of this stuff is classic. These are classic tools for ADHD, for psychological benefit, right? These are like your classic reframing basics. And there is no reason that we can't train our brains and say, hey, brain, like I want to become friends. Let's spend some time together. And how we're going to do that is when you bring some BS to me, right? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop you right there. And we're going to just reframe it so that I don't get down some road and down some rabbit hole that actually ends up causing more damage than not, right? I don't organically look for a silver lining in things that are lifey that just happen, right? I don't organically go, oh, well, I'm sure there's a reason for this, right? I don't do that. So, as I mentioned before about the Velcro and the Teflon, it may be as if our brain is set to default towards the Velcro of negativity. Okay, so, if it were as easy as flipping a light switch, I mean, this would be a cool thing, but it's just really not until we make ourselves aware of that. At least that's what I have found for me. Imagine if we are able to train our brain to recognize that first negative thought, right? That when it pops into our brain, oh, my husband thinks this, instead of clarifying and just sharing, hey, the story I'm telling myself is, to use the old Brene Brown saying that's been around the block, right? The story I'm telling myself. So when that first negative thought pops into our minds, right? How are we going to be able to flip the script to the positive? And one way I believe we can do that, and it's important for me, is to just say to myself, you know what? Everyone's doing the best they can. And when I can embrace that and fully believe it, ooh, it has life-changing capabilities, right? Everyone's doing the best that they can because that varies from day to day, at least in my experience, right? And there's acting as if, and there is acting your way into new thinking and all of that, which is kind of like cousined up with this concept. It's all part of it, but it's kind of also another topic. But I'm telling you, as someone who is no longer kind of this natural optimist, all of this is possible to change our mindset, right? To train our brains. And, you know, some days I will just realize that, oh, I hate the rain and oh, but here's the deal. I grew up in California and I lived there until I was 22, 23. And every single like day of my life was sunny. And you know what? I didn't appreciate it. I did not appreciate it because it was annoying, right? It was like there were no seasons. Every single day was like between 70 and 80 and sunny. And I will find the flaw. You know what I'm saying? My brain will find the flaw. And that always bugged me. So when we had the opportunity to move to Seattle, I was so excited to have different weather. I was so excited for the rain. I could not believe it. I was pumped, right? And it's like, that's what our brains do. It's just crazy making. It's like, okay, so fact of the matter is, yes, it is 70 or 80 degrees and it is sunny. Yes. what is my reaction going to be? How do I reframe that, to go from a negative to a positive, right? Which I know sounds insane to the majority of people listening to this right now. Like, how could you grow up in a place and think that that was negative? Well, when you are not naturally optimistic and you're not finding the joy in the journey every single day, it happens, right? And so this sense of like Alexander and what was it called? The Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Do you remember that book? I read that book as a kid, and I think I adopted some of that persona of that kid. I mean, he has like all this bad stuff happen, and he like has to get new shoes, but they're out of like the ones he wants that are in his size, and just like then I can't remember if he steps on gum or he gets gum in his hair, something happens like that. I'll have to reread it, but just that lens, that everything that happens to him is seemingly bad, right? And the truth of the matter is, if I am willing to look through that lens to the other side, I actually will see that, like, oh, you know what? Yeah, they didn't have my size shoe and it was a bummer. Like, that sucked. I really wanted these shoes or whatever it is. But I did get to have a conversation with this person while I was waiting in line to purchase the shoes that I didn't really want to have. And you know what that person told me was something pivotal. And here's what it was. Like, whatever it is that is happening in my life can be interrupted and replaced with something more positive. So when we interrupt that thought pattern before it really gets going and picking up momentum, and like, this is the worst day ever, right? We do have that power to get out of that stinking thinking by first recognizing it and then switching directions. So, this is like if you remember as a little kid, maybe you had that one neighbor friend who had a swimming pool with a hot tub. Do you remember like everybody in the 80s had that one neighbor friend who had like the kidney shaped pool with like the circular hot tub? And a lot of people call them, I love this word, jacuzzis. Do you remember that word? Jacuzzi. I don't know if that's still a word that people use, but it's so funny to me. I'm like, that's like the best name ever for like a baby. Jacuzzi. Isn't that cute? Anyways, okay. So you have a neighbor friend who has this hot tub slash jacuzzi, and it was this circular one, right? And so, like, you and your neighbor friend and your buddies would all jump in it, right? And then start walking in the same direction on the seats in the hot tub. And then pretty soon you kind of speed up and all of a sudden you're sort of run swimming in the same direction, right? And then somebody would inevitably yell like whirlpool. And at that point, you have to stop. You stop run swimming and you turn around and you go the other way. And so the current is like pushing your body back, like pushing it back as you try and swim the opposite direction, because y'all were headed all in the same direction and you created this momentum, right? But now you're trying to turn around and run the other way, right? And then pretty soon after you fought that current for a while, you realize how the whirlpool is kind of going the other direction now, and you're not finding it as difficult as you were before, right? And so this same concept is what I try to do with my reframing, particularly in the morning. I get on my 6 a.m. meeting. I mentioned this before, and I try and move from a fear kind of scarcity mindset, to an abundance mindset and a freedom mindset. And I do that by writing everything out. Because if I don't start with that P, that powerlessness. I miss out on that power because I have to get honest. If I'm not honest, and if I just wake up and I flip the switch and I'm like, woo, everything's positive and wonderful, it's not real. I've got to work at it. And this is my own experience. And the experience of a lot of people that I know is that this does not happen organically, right? So it's to interrupt the limiting beliefs that fly into our brains, whether it's in the morning or throughout the day. We want to stop those limiting beliefs, or at least I want to, before they pick up serious momentum, right? And I need to head the other direction to get to a more positive framework. So it's training a mindset. And I can tell you from personal experience, after doing this for a while, it is kind of amazing. Most times I can, as I mentioned, work through it faster. So this is something that becomes a little bit easier over time. And I will say that it is rare for me to go to a 12-step meeting these days where it is not solution based, where you get on the meeting, if it's on Zoom, or you go to a meeting in person, and it's just a big drunkalog of people who are trying to like not drink for that day. It's like people are trying to just turn their lives over to the power of God, a power that they don't understand, who you could call God or you could call a higher power, but it's that realization that things happen in life, right? And people will share that. People will share that honest truth of what is going on and how they're handling it. And most of the meetings that I find myself in, at about 3/4 of the way through someone's share, they're talking about a challenge or something that they're facing usually, or something that they did face at one time. About 3/4 of the way through, all of a sudden, you hear them talking about what they are doing or what happened. Maybe something happened, a shift happened, a change happened that they were receptive to, or something they tried to do, or something they realized. But as they're speaking, they sort of start to like solve their own issue, right? And this is what happens in therapy too. Like, this is the goal, as far as I understand it, in cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is to get to the point where you are solving your own problems, because that's like super empowering, to be able to work through something and solve your own issues. Um, that's a skill set. It is learned, at least for somebody like myself. It is not something I naturally possess. It is something that I learn and then have to practice. So in these 12-step meetings, I generally don't hear that level of heartfelt honesty pouring out of people. I usually, in other places and institutions, just hear like sort of pat, sort of party lines and rote answers that uh, have been passed down, that that particular person who's giving that quote advice, the person dispensing some advice or quote helpful ideas or suggestions, has actually never like practiced or done themselves. But a lot of times they're like, well, here's what you do, right? And here's the answer to life. And like, I just don't find that that is as genuine as here. I need to hear the struggle, because the struggle sets up the, the comeback, right? The setup basically sets itself up for the comeback. So you sort of need both. I don't know very many people who have not had any struggles in their life. Whether or not those people are going to be willing to share them is a totally different story. But that's why I like 12-step meetings, because they are solution-based meetings, at least the ones I attend, and that is my experience, right? So all this to say that in my mind, we are all just walking each other home. And that, of course, is a famous quote by the great late Ram Dass. And so if we're trying to help each other down the same path, right? And I stumble on a rock, and then a while later, somebody else who's also on the path stumbles on a rock, I can say to that person, like, hey, I stumbled and struggled back there like a little bit ago on this big rock too. And then that person doesn't feel quite so alone or maybe hurt or embarrassed. Or, maybe I can slow down and I can walk alongside with that person. Um, it's it's amazing, the camaraderie and the bonds and the connective tissue that are built basically simply from shared experience. So they don't always have to heed your advice. It's not like you're giving unsolicited advice. That's really a big thing for 12 steppers is we don't dispense advice. We simply share things that worked for us. And so that's what I hope I'm coming across as here, not telling you there's one right way to reach reframing and resetting, right? But that there are many, many ways, and that this is what works best for me. So we are letting go of these limiting beliefs, even the things like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'm not good at that, right? I don't know if anybody else does that to themselves. I can't learn that. Somebody just brought up the concept of a Patreon to me. Somebody else brought up a Kickstarter. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. No, that's not true. That is not true. I can learn how to do those things at this very second as of this recording. They're not my priority, and that's okay, right? It doesn't mean I'm never going to be able to do that or I don't have the tech skills to do it. Yes, I just need practice. Just like reframing and resetting is practice. Okay? So, here's the key for today. So we're learning, we're practicing letting go of these limiting beliefs to train our minds and our mindsets. And we want to train our minds and our mindsets to turn toward. So in other words, stop that whirlpool and go the other direction, right? And turn toward possibility. So another example of this is like collecting this evidence, which I alluded to earlier, and metrics. So an example of this in yoga, all right? So I'm a big believer in yoga. I love yoga, practiced it since I got sober. And they often ask you, like at the beginning of a class, to pick an intention. So these can be anything you want. They can be very general. They can be having an attitude of gratitude. They can be choosing joy. They can be, I mean, you can, whatever's going on in your life or whatever you want to focus on or whatever pops into your head can be your intention, right? Maybe you want to love the unlovable today. Or, you know, they can be super specific. You can say at the beginning of a class that you want your intention to be, I'm trying to be loving toward my mother-in-law, or I'm trying to crush it in the speech that I'm giving today, or whatever it is, right? I'm going to face my fears and I'm going to pet that snake or get on that airplane or whatever. Now, as I kind of launch into this key, I want to let you know that I firmly and fully believe in affirmations, the kind where you look yourself in the mirror and you tell yourself that you love yourself and that you're beautiful. And I do believe that absolutely works over time and with consistency, okay? And I know because that is something that I was taught in rehab and it worked for me. And the only time when it didn't work for me was when I didn't do it consistently. Anyways, that's an aside. But, what tends to work even better for many people is to set an intention in the morning, and then throughout the day, just be like cognizant of where you are meeting that goal, right? Where you are able to draw on a power greater than yourself, where you're sort of like maybe like, okay, this day isn't really turning out the way I wanted it to, or the way I had hoped, or it's not sort of lining up with my intention that I made that morning. What? Shocker. Life isn't doing what I want it to do. What? Right? Okay. Um, but here's the thing, it's progress, not perfection, right? So, for example, if your goal is to be more patient and you're going to make cultivating patience your intention in the morning, right? Then maybe your day starts going along, and then all of a sudden you're standing in the grocery store line or at Target, and the person in front of you has teleported to like 1991 and they are writing a check, and you use that opportunity to, instead of roll your eyes and sigh and tap your foot and shift your weight, right? Maybe you take that opportunity to just start taking some deep breaths in your mind. Maybe you wish them well. Maybe you wish for them a spirit of cultivating different payment methods in the future. I mean, whatever it is, right? So you want to remember that that is a mind shift. Whereas before, maybe you just start um, having those body language reactions, and not care, not think about it, just be annoyed, right? And let that poison the well for the rest of your day. So these are the things that are little nuggets of evidence of growth, where it's like, you know what? Yeah, that annoyed me, but I didn't show it on the outside. I didn't let my body language show it. Or I stopped myself and I took those deep breaths and I tried to shift what my mind was doing, right? That's these little points along the way that we want to, if you are paying attention, you can realize and put down in your journal, right? To write down, hey, I've got evidence that when my brain tells me I'm an asshole or I'm not a very giving person or whatever it is, no, I'm going to write down, you know what? I was tempted to be impatient, and I had made an intention that morning that patience was something that I was going to work on. And then I had this opportunity to practice it, and guess what? My belief and my behavior lined up, right? I didn't fly off the handle, right? And we have a million paper cuts that we face every day that are opportunities for this. And some people are super competitive, right? And like type A, and they're just like, hey, yeah, I'm going to change my mindset and I'm going to write down all of these little victories that I have at the end of the day. When I've set my intention in the morning for patience, I'm going to write down all these, like it's like a game for them, right? Like, no matter the circumstance, I don't care. Someone can honk their horn and cut me off, and I will not react, right? Like, I will practice non-reactivity, and I'm going to write it down and write down as many as possible. And then I'm going to form an accountability group, and we're all going to compare how many times a day we were tempted to like be dicks and we weren't, right? So, you can do all of those tricks. The mind is so powerful, right? So, what I'm saying is, we're essentially building a tangible bank of evidence that we are a patient person, so that when that thought pops into our head, right? Oh, I'm an impatient person. No, I'm not. I have evidence to the contrary, right? And we can do this with identity statements. We can do this in a variety of ways. And affirmations are all supportive of this. They work congruently, right? So having that reframing sense turns totally turns our whirlpool into one of positivity and possibility, flipping the script, finding the evidence, because it will separate the fact from fiction and it will help keep us from reverting to that stinking thinking and engaging in it, right? So we remember suddenly, like, I'm going to look down at this evidence that I've now written and I'm going to see, like, what actually happened. Oh, I have evidence that I am a good parent. You know, I spent all this time with my kids this weekend and we were fully engaged. I started a new routine with my husband and we don't jump on our phones first thing in the morning. We have coffee and we chat, whatever it is, right? So you can paste together these little points of positivity. And I'm telling you, what you focus on grows, at least for me. If I am focused on these positive things and mindset training, they snowball. Oh, sorry. We've got something happening downstairs, but um, my nanny is here, so I'm not going to worry about it. Um, so secondly, I have found that when I am more focused on positive things than negative things, which takes work, right? I can also then take it a step further and I can create in my mind possibilities of what could be, right? So then all of a sudden, my mindset is not like, oh, I'm not good at that. My mindset is more of like, oh, well, I have the confidence to believe that I can do that. Or, yes, I can learn that, right? It's more of a spin that will bring into my life that abundance mindset. And coming full circle, really, when I get to choose my reaction, that is power. That is empowering. And it is how we've taken a situation that is seemingly powerless and we've now turned it into power. So somehow, when you write these things down, these little nuggets of like, oh my gosh, I'm actually making growth and progress as a person who's contributing positively to the stream of life, right? Our lives, they go by so quickly. So if we write these things down, it is a way that we can love ourselves enough that when we're in those dark spots and those, times of guilt and shame and just emotional, not feeling right, not comfortable in our own skin, we can dig out these journals, right? And look back on them and just go, I have evidence. I am not an asshole, right? I'm just not. I'm doing the very best that I can. It applies to me too, right? Because we are all doing the best that we can. And that may not be true, but if I believe it, it helps me. And I am fostering self-love because I know if I learn to deepen the relationship with myself and I continue that over time, and I've achieved it after many, many, many years of not loving myself. But if I can keep that momentum going and love and accept myself even more, right? That is going to benefit everyone around me because I will not be a hemorrhaging mess all over everybody in my life. And a final thing that I will say is if you're at the beginning stages of learning to reframe and reset, start with some very simple things in your journal. Like, I'm a great writer because ellipsis, right? Dot, dot, dot. Or, I am learning and growing because dot, 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 whatever it is. Maybe you're proud of yourself for listening to your crazy Uncle Joe's rant about politics and you didn't jump in and completely rip his head off, right? Maybe there's a religious belief system that you disagree with. And instead of completely bombarding that person with your viewpoints, you just kind of said, thank you for sharing your perspective and walked away, right? Whatever it is, whether you're working on your physical, emotional, mental health, spiritual growth, whatever it is, maybe you're working on December or you're involved in some kind of a thing like mustache November for human trafficking, whatever, maybe it's something big, maybe it's something small. At the end of a day, or maybe the next day in your journal, can you find evidence that showed that you are still on that pathway of believing, whether it is, hey, yeah, I wore a dress yesterday and it's Dresscember. Or maybe I didn't wear a dress yesterday, but it's at the dry cleaners and it's in preparation for me to wear the following day. You're still acting within the scope of the affirmation that you want to be, the person that you want to make deposits to become. I hope that was helpful. I'll see you next time. Remember that in all circumstances, I just wish you to be kind and rewind. I want to thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for the honor of your time. And I want you to take what you like, what you've heard here today, and leave the rest behind.